Hello, my name is Nalani Brown. I'm the philanthropy coordinator at Frank Toby Jones, and I'm going to be picking up on chapter 20 of Rita Mae Brown and Sneaky Pie Brown, Cat on the Scent. Warm spring light flooded the barn, illuminating Rick Shaw's face as he stood under the wing of the Cessna. Behind him, a young woman dusted for fingerprints. Not a drop of blood marred the shiny surface of the airplane or the cockpit, although there were muddy paw prints on the wings and the cockpit. No dings, dents, or smears of oil hinted at foul play. The wheels of the small plane were blocked. In fact, everything was in order. The gas tank was almost full. They could have crawled up into the Cessna to cruise through creamy clouds on this gorgeous day. Cynthia spoke to Tally Urquhart. Miss Tally's sight remained keen, her hearing sharp, but her powers of locomotion had diminished. After fervid wrangling sprinkled with the utterance of unladylike epithets, she had agreed to stop driving. No longer able to ride astride, she allowed herself the pleasures of driving a matched pair of hackney ponies to the terror of her neighbors. Her major domo, Kyle Washburn, had the honor of transporting her many clubs and good deeds. Her majordomo, Kyle Washburn, had the honor of transporting her to many clubs and good deeds. It was also his duty to hang on when she took the reins. There were many in Albemarle County who thought no amount of money was too much to pay Kyle. I told you that, Tally snapped. I know it's irritating, ma'am, but my job is to check and double check. She tossed her white curls, hair still luxuriously thick. Tommy Van Allen put his plane in my big hay barn and walked away, never to return, and I heard nothing. At no time did you hear a plane buzz by the house? Cynthia braced herself for the blast. Are you deaf? No. Kyle stepped in. Miss Tally is in town a lot, Deputy. Anyone who knows her and her busy schedule would have no trouble landing here when she was out of the house. You hear anything? Cynthia smiled at him. Nope. Mr. Washburn. She leaned towards his weathered, freckled face. How could this plane sit here and you not know it? Winter hay barn, Tally snapped, as though that simple description would be enough for any intelligent person. Miss Tally fills this barn up with hay in the fall. Usually, I open it wide in May, air it out. I'm behind this year, a little. So you two think whoever parked a plane here. Do you park a plane? Well, whoever did this knows Miss Tally's schedule? Yes, Kyle answered while Tally glared. This was damned inconvenient, and she knew the situation would bring her bossy niece over once again to interfere. Using her cane with vigor, hand clutched over the silver hound's head, Tally stalked Harry. I don't know any more than you do, Harry shrugged. You know a good deal less. Tally pointed her cane at Harry. You say you chase these varmints here? I am no varmint, Tucker yipped. They led me right to the barn. Tally studied the animals at Harry's feet. Sometimes animals know things. Your mother had a marvelous sense of animals. She could talk to them, I swear, and they talked back, Tally said, her smile momentarily tinged with melancholy. Then, steeling herself, she again eyed Harry. You get used to it. By the time you're my age, everyone's dead. 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 No use crying over spilt milk. She took a little breath. And if you ask me, Tommy Van Allen is dead too. Rich, respectfully silent until now, asked, And why do you say that, ma'am? Tommy Van Allen is as wild as a rat. He'd be here if he were alive. Some people think he was selling drugs. Maybe a big haul had disappeared, Rick suggested. Piffle. Ma'am? He might use them. He wouldn't sell them. That boy was a lot of things, but stupid wasn't one of them. He wouldn't sell drugs. She pointed her cane at Rick's chest. Every time something happens around here, everyone yells drugs. Too much TV. She turned to Harry. You're a nosy kid. Always where. Always were. In the blood. Your great-grandfather was nosy. Which one? Said Harry. Biddy Minor, the handsomest man I ever saw. Had to know everything, though. Killed him, of course. Rick, a student of local crime, said gently, since it wouldn't do to correct her. It was never proven. She raised an eyebrow, barely dinging to refute his prattle. Proving and knowing are two different things, Sheriff. Just like I know Tommy Van Allen is dead. I know it. You have to prove it, I suppose. Ma'am, we can't convict anyone without proof. Convict them? Her thin voice rose. Convict them? They're out in the streets. They've been there for 6 months. Rick blushed. Miss Tally, I feel the exact same way, but I have a job to do. I'm elected to do this position. She softened. And so you are. Well, what else do you want to know? Can you think of any reason someone would want to kill Tommy Van Allen? She paused thoughtfully. No more than anyone else. By that I mean he and his share of angry ex-girlfriends, his share of people who didn't plain like him. Can you think of any reason why someone would shoot Sir H. Vane Tempest? Pompous, silly ass. She shrugged her bony shoulders. You're going to canvass my neighbors, aren't you? Surely one of them heard this airplane. We will speak to everyone, Rick assured her. A crunch of tires on gravel turned all heads in the direction of the Bentley Turbo R pulling into the open barn. Tucker barked as the motor cut off and one elegant leg swung out of the driver's side. Mim! The little dog rushed forward to greet the haughty Mim, who nonetheless loved dogs. She bent over to pat Tucker's head, and the dog happily tagged at her heels. Don't you start telling me what to do. Tally's lower lip jutted out. I'm not. I'm here to help. Mim stopped to study the plane. Extraordinary, she said quietly. If you all don't need me any longer, I'll go. Harry began to move forward toward the open door. Go on, Sheriff Shaw nodded. Cynthia called out, I'll catch you later. Miss Tally placed her left hand on Harry's arm. Her thin ring gleamed. Mary Minor, you never believed that story about my brother shooting your great-granddaddy because Biddy walked up on his still, did you? No. She nodded satisfied. Good girl. Harry herded Mrs. Murphy, Pewter, and Tucker into the truck, hearing Mim say, Now, Aunt Tally, why would anyone put a plane in your barn? To give me excitement in my declining years, she said. Chapter 21. That evening, Harry walked out of the creek dividing her land from Blair Bainbridge's. A soft squish accompanied each step. Pewter picked her paws up, periodically shaking them. It was much worse the other night, Mrs. Murphy nonchalantly remarked. I'll have to spend half the night washing my feet. Stick 'em under the faucet, the dog joked. Never. Pewter shook her paws again. Harry stopped at the creek. The sun was setting, crowning the mountains in pink clouds suffused with gold. Tucker sat down. I'm not sitting down in this, Pewter complained. You're cranky. Bet you've got a tapeworm. I do not. The cat slapped at the dog, who laughed. You should talk. Mrs. Murphy hated those monthly worm pills, but they worked. She knew Tucker sometimes cheated and spit hers out. Then she'd feel bad. Harry would discover evidence of roundworms and Tucker would really get a dose of the medicine. Harry drank in the sunset and the sound of peepers. She studied her animals, uncanny as though they knew where the plane was stashed. It occurred to Harry that whoever deposited Tommy Van Allen's airplane would not be happy to know that she had discovered it. But someone would have eventually done so. She didn't think she'd be in the line of fire. But Sir H. Vane Tempest was. Just doesn't compute, she said out loud. It's not our problem. Pewter felt that supper time started with sunset. She turned to face the distant house, hoping Harry would take the hint. Instead, Harry climbed the massive walnut tree. Mrs. Murphy joined her, as did Pewter. What am I supposed to do? The dog whined at the base of the tree. Guard us, Tucker, Mrs. Murphy said. I might have to, the dog grumbled. Unless you forget, egoist of all time, I ran and chased the bobcat. You did, and I am grateful. said Mrs. Murphy. How often do humans climb trees? Pewter watched Harry swing her legs as she sat on the low, wide branch. Not very often. As they get older, they don't do it at all, I think. Mrs. Murphy answered, You see so much more from up here. You'd think they'd want to keep doing it. No claws. Must be hard for them. Pewter kept her claws dangerously sharp. Everything's hard for them. That's why their religions are full of fear. You know, hellfire and damnation, that sort of thing. And being plunged into darkness. Tucker agreed with the tiger cat. If they could see in the dark as well as we do, their gods would be dark gods. Mrs. Murphy pitied humans and their wide variety of fears. If they were bats, their gods would be sounds. Tucker suffered no religious anxiety. She knew perfectly well that a corgi presided over the universe, and she ignored the cat's blasphemous references to a celestial feline. How long do you think Harry will live? Pewter rubbed against the cobbed trunk of the tree. Walnuts, beautiful trees, possessed the exact right type of bark for cats to sharpen their claws on, and it was good to rub against too. She's strong, into her 80s, I'd say, maybe as long as Tally-U-Cart, Murphy replied. Then why are humans scared? Really, they live much longer than we do. Nah, just seems longer, Tucker giggled. The cats laughed. Mrs. Murphy watched Harry hum to herself, swinging her legs as she enjoyed the slow swift of colors. From pink to salmon to blood red shot through their fingers of gray. She truly loved this human and wished Harry would be more like a cat. It would improve her life. Harry suddenly noticed the animals all observing her. She burst out laughing. Hey guys. Well, hey back at you, they replied. Isn't it beautiful? Yes, came the chorus. It's time for supper. Pewter, Mrs. Murphy corrected her. Pewter fell silent. If she complained, she'd probably be struck out in her walnut. If she complained, she'd probably be stuck out in the walnut tree longer. With luck, Harry's rapture would pass soon. Did you ever worry about who will take care of Mom when we're dead? Tucker soberly asked Murphy. She'll bring in a puppy and a kitten by the time we're old. We will train them. I'm not training any kitten, Pewter huffled. That's because you have nothing to teach the next generation. Aren't we clever? Pewter boxed Murphy's ears. Murphy boxed right back. The two felines moving forward and backward on the heavy branch as Harry laughed at them. Pewter whacked Murphy hard and the tiger slipped. She grabbed at the branch with her front paws, but her hind legs dangled over the edge. Here. Harry reached over and grabbed her by the scruff of her neck, pulling her up. She put the tiger cat in her lap. Pewter advanced on Murphy. Don't you dare, or I will fall off. Harry shook her finger at Pewter, who grabbed her finger. She sheathed her claws, but her pupils were big, so she appeared ferocious. Who will open the cans if Harry gets hurt? Murphy spit in Pewter's face. Ugh, now that is enough. Harry tapped the tiger's head with her index finger. It didn't hurt, but it was irritating. A sweet purr attracted everyone's attention. A pair of headlights a mile off swung into view. Blair pulled into his driveway. He got out of his car, then opened the door for a little Mim. Can she see? Pewter asked Murphy. It's clear enough. She can see that far. Interested, too. Who wouldn't be interested in the Porsche, Tucker said. She's curious about him. Oh. Tucker watched a twig by the tree. What was what about Biddy Minor? Miss Tally said curiosity killed him? I don't know. Long before my time. That's way back in our great-grandmother's time, I guess. You'd think they'd talk about it. Pewter backed down the tree. If the others weren't going home, she was. There might be some dried crunchies left in the bowl on the countertop. Maybe they did and we didn't hear it, but I don't think Harry's talked about it, Mrs. Murphy said, as she hopped out of Harry's lap and backed down the walnut tree also. She talked as she felt for her footing, the slight piercing sound of her claws sinking in bark. She talked as she felt for her footing, the slight piercing sound of her claws sinking in bark audible even to the human. Maybe she made a passing reference. It would have happened in the 20s, I think. That long ago? Murphy reached the bottom as Tucker walked over to her. Well, if Biddy was Harry's great-grandfather, you figure he was born in the 1880s, not much later than 1900 for sure. Let's look it up in the family Bible, Tucker suggested, when she's asleep. Okay. Peter would have agreed to anything just to get out to the house. Harry skinned the cat, turning upside down from the branch and dropping to the ground below. Very good, Murphy praised her. As they walked back together, Harry asked them, "Did you all know about Tommy Van Allen's plane?" "Yes," Mrs. Murphy and Tucker replied. Peter said nothing because she hadn't seen it before, even though Mrs. Murphy had told her everything. Harry smiled at them, oblivious to their answers. Smart kids. Sometimes. Tucker, more modest than the cats, responded. What I don't like about this is it's too close to home. Murphy emphasized home. Tally Urquhart's only 4 miles away. It doesn't concern Mom no matter how far away or how close it is. Peter had taken to calling Harry Mom, even though she had been raised by Market Shiflett and she occasionally helped out in his store. This is a small town. Everything concerns everybody, and we led Mom to what may become damaging evidence for someone else. We were stupid. Murphy realized her mistake. I never thought of that. Tucker pressed closer to Harry. Me neither. I wish I had. Don't worry about it until they find a body, Peter said. Whoever landed that plane had guts. The fog that night was thick as Mrs. Hagendauber's gravy. Bold ones like that do things other people don't dream of. They take wild chances. Whoever was with Tommy probably killed him, which means I saw the killer. I couldn't tell you one thing about him, though, except that he was shorter than Van Allen. But whoever killed Tommy can't be but so far away. You know what? Peter played the devil's advocate. Oh, you don't know that. Peter played the devil's advocate. But I do. Mrs. Murphy dashed ahead a few paces. What would someone far away have to gain by removing Tommy Van Allen? And removing H. Vane Tempest, Tucker interrupted. He's still hanging on. Peter wasn't convinced. Mrs. Murphy continued her thoughts. If Van Allen has some distant relatives who might inherit his construction business, well, it might be someone far away, but I doubt that's the case. Everyone will know when his will is read, Peter shrugged. Since no one knows that he's dead, yet the will won't be read. His property will stay intact, Murphy said, her tail straightening out horizontally. Someone has to run the business. Tucker began to feel uneasy. Whoever is vice president of his corporation will, but think about it. It doesn't matter who runs the business. What matters is where the profits go, and they won't go into anyone's pockets until he is legally declared dead. Mrs. Murphy, if the killer stands to profit from Tommy's death, then the body must be revealed. Peter was hungry and frustrated. This didn't make a bit of sense to her. Exactly. I don't get it, Tucker forthrightly said, her voice high. Be patient. Mrs. Murphy smiled at them as they caught up to walk beside her. Whoever killed Tommy is in no hurry. I don't know what Virginia laws say about when you're legally declared dead, but I guarantee our killer knows. Someone has a great deal to gain by this. Could be love gone sour. Peter searched for a different tack. Could be. Murphy inhaled the sharp fragrance of the shed, bursting with wood shavings. Peter was happy when they went home. Tucker was growing more concerned by the minute. You're making me nervous. Maybe we're looking at this from the wrong angle. Mrs. Murphy bounced through the screen door when Harry opened it. She liked to let Harry open it. It wouldn't do for Harry to know all of her tricks. Maybe the question is, what do Tommy Van Allen and H. Vane have in common? Nothing, Peter said. Tucker demurred. Plenty. The two animals looked at each other as Harry wiped off the kitchen counter and pulled out cans of food. They don't have anything in common, Peter defended her position. Tommy is young and handsome. H. Vane has got to be in his 70s. The facelift makes him look a little bit younger. He had a facelift? Tucker asked. I can always tell. It's the eyes. The faces lose some of their expressions, their expressiveness, even with the good jobs. Pewter authoritatively declared. But those two don't have anything in common. Tommy's divorced. H. Vane is happily married, or appears to be. Tommy is wild and boisterous. H. Vane has a stick up his ass. My turn, if you're finished. Pewter waited by her food bowl, which said, "Loyal friend." I'm finished, I think. Okay, they're both well off. H. Vane is beyond well off. He's Midas, but they can do whatever they want. They belong to the same clubs, they go to the same parties, they both like to fly, and Tommy was going to do the reenactment. Every man in Crozet was going to do that. That's not enough. Pewter purred when Harry scooped up the tuna. Maybe Tommy had an affair with Sarah. Tucker buried her face in her food. They tabled the discussion until after they were done eating. Harry whistled, tired of her own whistle, and then turned on the radio. She liked the classical station and the country and western. She turned to the classical station out of Lynchburg. She heated the griddle, pulled out 2 slices of bread and 2 fat slices of American cheese. She loved cheese sandwiches, dressing them with mayonnaise and hamburger pickles. Sometimes she'd squirt a little bit of ketchup on there too. Tucker finished first, as always. Hurry up. You don't savor your food, Pewter did, of course. It tastes good to me. I don't know why you hover over yours. Tucker, you are such a dog, Pewter hauntingly replied. Mrs. Murphy, a slow eater, paused. If Tommy slept with Sarah, the question is, did H. Vane know? He certainly seemed friendly enough to Tommy. Pewter pitched in her 2 cents. H. Vane would hardly kill Tommy, then get it back himself. H. Vane would hardly kill Tommy, then get it in the back himself. This is screwy. No, it isn't. We haven't found the key yet, that's all. Mrs. Murphy was resolute. And now that we've somewhat compromised Mom, we better figure this out. Tucker had lived with Mrs. Murphy a very long time. She knew how the cat thought. Yes. Pewter, food bits clinging to her whiskers, jerked her head up from the bowl. She'd stick her nose in it even if he hadn't taken her to the airplane. Even Miss Tally said it was in the blood. You got that right. Mrs. Murphy thought Pewter looked silly. Remember what we said about Biddy Minor? Curiosity killed him. Tucker whispered. I thought curiosity killed the cat. Pewter swallowed some carefully chewed tuna. Shut up. Murphy hated that expression. I'd prefer cats have 9 lives myself. Well, I only have 1, and I intend to take very good care of it. Tucker snapped her jaws shut with a click. Chapter 22. The shadows etched an outline of the budding trees onto the impeccably manicured lawn of the Lutheran church. The Reverend Herbert C. Jones, in clerical garb, fiddled with his fly rod as he stood on the moss-covered brick wallway on the beige clapboard office. Window shutters painted Charleston green. He'd finished his sermon for Sunday, and since this was Tuesday, he felt on top of the world. True, his desk contained 4 mountains of neatly ordered paperwork, but a man couldn't work around the clock. Even the good Lord rested on the 7th day, and the afternoon, balmy and warm, enticed him from the grind of paperwork. He got his fishing rod and went outside. Usually, Herb packed the church's 1987 white Chevy truck on the corner to let people know that he was at church. Since he received many calls to pick up this and drop off that for a parishioner in need, it was also useful for the truck to sit ready. Keys in the ignition. However, at the moment, the Chevy had a flat left front tire, which irritated him to no end because he had endured a flat tire just last year on the right front and had replaced both front tires. He had parked the Chevy in the brick garage behind the office until he could fix it. Lovely winding brick paths meandered from the church to the garage, formerly the stable, and to his graceful residence, subdued, classic, and Flemish bond. The tail of the Chevy poked from out of the garage. His Buick Roadmaster was parked next to the old truck. I'll stand here and cast at the tail light, he told himself. Lucifer watched her human with detached amusement. Mrs. Murphy and Pewter were visiting from the post office. The animal door that Harry had installed there was a godsend because the animals didn't have to lurk by the front door waiting for a person to open it. All too often, the human would close the door fast or step on them because the humans lacked a sharp sense of how much space they took up or how much space other creatures needed. They were always bumping into things, stepping on tails, or tripping over their own feet. With the animal door at the rear of the old frame building, the creatures could come and go at will. The cats especially enjoyed prowling the neighborhood to visit other cats. Lucifer, a gorgeous young Maine Coon cat, had walked into Herb's life on one stormy night. He kept her because elocution was getting on in years, and he thought a younger companion would do her good. At first, elocution had hissed and spit. That lasted 2 weeks. Then she tried the deep freeze. Every time the kitten would walk by, she'd turn her back. After a month, she accepted Lucifer, teaching her the duties of a preacher's cat. The first, for any cat, is to catch mice. However, there were communion wafers to count, vestments to inspect, sermons to read, parishioners to comfort, and a variety of functions to attend. Both cats excelled as fundraisers, mingling with the crowd and encouraging generosity with both checkbooks and food. The 3 cats sat abreast in the deep window ledge of the house. Sunlight like golden butter drenched their shiny fur. They watched Herb Riley. Herb put his right foot back as he lifted his right arm. He wriggled a minute, then cast down toward a tail light. He'd done better. "Damn," he muttered under his breath, reeling his line in, a tiny lead weight dangling on the end. His hand tied fly, white and speckled black, slightly above it. "Is this some Christian ritual?" Peter asked. "Not the way he does it," Lucifer giggled. Again, the gentle Reverend cocked his wrist, placed his feet in the correct position, and softly flicked his line out. This cast was worse than the first one. "Hell's bells!" His voice rose. "Might prayer help?" Mrs. Murphy dryly noted. "As far as I know, there is no prayer specific to fishing." Lucifer's opinion was an informed one. She studied the text. "What about Jesus talking to the men casting their nets?" Mrs. Murphy suggested. Luke 5, verse 1 through 11. It's the story where the men fished all night, came up empty, and Jesus told them to go out and throw their nets. They caught so many fish their ships began to sink. And that's when Simon Peter joined Jesus. He was one of the fishermen. Impressed, Murphy gasped. "You should talk to Mrs. Hagendauber. She'd have a fit and fall in." "Oh," Lucifer airily replied. "She wouldn't listen. You know she believes in this charismatic stuff. She ought to submit to the rigor of the Lutheran catechism. I don't believe you sit around waiting until the Spirit moves you." "She hardly sits," Pewter noted, herself a sharp critic of human mystical learnings. But in the case of Miranda, the good woman practiced what she preached. "Uh-oh, I don't think biblical references are going to help now." Murphy stared upward. Herb cast into a tree. "Christ on a crutch," he bellowed, then glanced over his shoulder to see if anyone was within earshot. Cats to the rescue. Murphy leapt off the window ledge, quickly followed by Pewter and Lucifer. Elocution, watching from the inside of the house, laughed so hard that she had to lie down. The tiger was halfway up the tree before Lucifer even reached the trunk. Pewter, not a girl to rush about, sashayed with dignity toward the purr-faced clergyman. "Now how am I going to get my hook out of the tree? That is one of my best flies." He threw his lad's cap on the grass. "Thank you." Pewter immediately sat on the herringbone cap. Herb stepped to the right, giving the line a tug. No release. He walked to the left, and Pewter watched. What pretty feathers. Murphy inspected the tied fly. "He sits up for hours tying these things. He won't let elocution or me help. He sputters if we even touch one of these precious feathers. I personally can't understand why fish would grab a feather if a bird is not attached. Life's too short to try and understand cold-blooded creatures. Mrs. Murphy unleashed one white claw, wedging it underneath the hook. "Stop pulling," she ordered Herb. He stopped. "That's my best fly. Don't you eat it." "Get a grip," Murphy laughed. "Let me help." Lucy Fur put her weight on the line so that if Herb did jerk it, there'd be a little slack so Murphy could pry up the hook. "Here it comes." Murphy popped it straight up. Herb stared up at the cats. He glanced around again. His wonders never cease. Then he laughed. The cats joined in. Slowly he reeled in his line, picking up his favorite fly to inspect the damage. There was none. He spoke to Pewter, who was all rapt attention. "Best fly in the world for rockfish bass." "Good eating," Pewter replied. She liked freshwater fish, especially if fried, but more than any other seafood, she loved crab meat. "You're on my cap." "You threw it on the ground, you big baby." Nonetheless, Pewter removed herself from the cap, which he promptly slapped back on his head. "Why is he wearing that now?" "Herringbone is for fall." Mrs. Murphy paid attention to fashions. "He has to get in the mood. You should see him rehearse his sermons. Once he used a cowboy as a metaphor, and he put on cowboy boots and a big hat." "He's funny." Murphy shimmied back down. "They all are." Lucy Fur backed down also. "Watch out," Pewter warned. "He's going to cast again." "Ugh, Jesus preserve us," Lucy Fur blurted out. He popped out the line. It sailed over the cat's upturned heads and nicked the bed of the truck just above the tail light. Ding! "Pretty good if I do say so myself." He grinned ear to ear. "Amen." He smiled outright, following his line to the truck. The cats scampered along. The shiny sinker tumbled into the truck bed. Mrs. Murphy leapt into the bed with Pewter and Lucy Fur on her heels. "Practice makes perfect," he sang out to himself, reaching into the bed and lifting out his sinker and fly as if they were gold-plated. "Well done," Lucy Fur congratulated him. He patted her on her magnificent head. Pewter noticed that the door was slightly ajar to the passenger side of the truck. "That broke too?" "Hey." Mrs. Murphy peered into the cab. Lucy Fur got on her hind legs and looked inside. Pewter stood next to her. "What?" Pewter said. "That bomber jacket." Lucy Fur's tail flipped left, then right. "Herb doesn't own a bomber jacket." Murphy jumped out of the bed. She tried to pry open the heavy truck door, but, although ajar, it was too much for her. "Whoever used the truck last forgot their jacket," Pewter shrugged. "Open the door," Murphy hollered at the top of her inconsiderable lungs. "You could wake the dead." Herb leaned his rod against the truck, walking over to the howling cat. "Oh," he noticed the door and opened it wider to shut it firmly. As he did, the cat hopped into the seat. "Now, Mrs. Murphy," he opened the door. "What's this?" All right, chapter 23. With no corpse, no motive, and no witnesses, Rick Shaw was in an inevitable position regarding the disappearance of Tommy Van Allen. By contrast, he had 30,000 witnesses to the shooting of Sir H. Vane Tempest. 30,003 if you counted Mrs. Murphy, Pewter, and T. Tucker. He looked into Mrs. Murphy's green eyes, which stared right back into his own. "Sure of yourself, aren't you?" he whispered to the cat. Then turned to Herb. "She shows up in the damnedest places. They both do." He stroked Pewter. Herb was holding Lucy Fur, more to comfort himself than anything. "Now, Herb, who used this truck last?" "I did," he said. "When?" "A week ago," he sheepishly continued. "I've been meaning to fix the flat, but it's always one thing or another." Cynthia Cooper pulled in to join them. Rick held out the bomber jacket. He wore gloves. TVA, Coop read aloud to the initials embroidered on the inside of the map pocket. "So the truck has been in the garage for a week," Rick went on. He turned back to Herb. "Have you checked it? You know, come out to get something from the glove compartment, anything?" No. How many people? Rick stopped himself. Everyone knew where the garage was. In fact, everyone knew everything almost. Do you have any idea why this jacket was in your truck? Sheriff, that is the $64,000 question. Herb betrayed his age when he used that phrase. Maybe Tommy put it in there himself. Maybe Tommy put it in there himself. Lucifer opposed her idea. No. Mrs. Murphy concentrated fiercely on the jacket. You know, when H. Vane was hauled away in the ambulance, I established the range for muzzle loaders, about 100 yards. That meant anyone in either of the two companies could have fired on him. I met the doctor the second she walked out of surgery. I did everything by the book. 3 bullet wounds can't be an accident, but I have no complaint filed by the victim. Isn't that odd? Yes. Herb crossed his arms over his chest. And I have a missing person I'm treating as, shall we say, an unfriendly disappearance. We find the airplane, nothing, except it's covered in pussycat paw prints. He cast an eye at Mrs. Murphy, even though he didn't realize those were her paw prints. I've come through Tommy's house and his office with his housekeeper. Nothing's been taken. The only things missing are what he was wearing, the clothes on his back, a signet ring, and his $45,000 Schaffenhausen watch. Herb whistled at the price. We've alerted pawn shops across the county. Oh, we've alerted pawn shops across the country. We've sent out photographs to every law enforcement agency, not a trace. What I'm driving at is, things are just too damn curious. Rick slapped his thigh in disgust. I'll check for prints. Fibers, you name it. He sighed audibly. But I can't put it together. Nobody can, boss. Coop brightened. At least we've got another clue. There is that, he smiled. Do you think the killer is trying to implicate me? Herb reached for his rod as though the touch of it would make everything all right. No, I don't, Rick smiled, and I have a suspicious mind. There are so many places to dispose of a jacket. Whoever put it here is in effect giving us the finger, begging your pardon, Reverend. Van Allen was probably wearing this jacket when he disappeared, Cynthia said. Herb, if you don't mind, leave the truck here for a day. We need to check it for prints. We've got a portable compressor. I'll fill up your tire. Once we're finished, tomorrow we can take it down to the garage. Thanks, that would be a really big help. Lucifer rubbed his leg. Don't worry, Poppy, everything will be all right. Tommy Van Allen was wearing a trench coat, collar turned up when I saw him at Tallier Carts. You saw him? Lucifer stopped mid-rub. I couldn't see his face, but how many 6'5" men are there? I was far away, and it was getting foggy with a hard rain, but he wasn't wearing that bomber jacket. Maybe he left it in his car and grabbed the trench coat because it was raining, Peter said. It doesn't matter whether it was raining, it doesn't matter whether he was wearing it, left it in a car, or whether his jacket was in someone else's car or someone else's house. That's really irrelevant at this point. Murphy's words were clipped. Peter disagreed. I think it's relevant. The killer or accomplice wanted to get rid of evidence. Maybe he forgot this jacket was in his car or truck or something. No way, the tiger stood up. He's putting down bad scent. Deliberately misleading us? Lucifer sat on Herb's sturdy walking shoe. You'd better believe it, and enjoying himself in the bargain. Mrs. Murphy felt the whole complexion of the events had changed, like a lightning change during a play. The mood shifts with the light. It can suddenly become treacherous. Chapter 24. Tubes invaded H. Vane Tempest's body. Alert, but in pain, he lay in the hospital bed counting the minutes until the next shot would bring him relief. What hurt most was his reset shoulder blade. Honey, drink a little water. You'll get dehydrated. Sarah held a plastic water cup with a big plastic bench straw in it. Dutifully, he drank. Where's the goddamn nurse? She'll be here in a minute. Sarah checked her watch. The heavy-set nurse appeared, right on time. How are you feeling? I felt better. She checked his chart and took his pulse. He's very uncomfortable. Can't you increase his dosage? No, only the doctor can do that. The nurse gently removed her fingers from his wrist. This will help for now. I know it wears off sooner than you'd like, but Dr. Svartsky is a firm believer in getting people up and out of here as soon as possible. If you become dependent on painkillers, it's that much harder. H. Vane glared at her as she stuck the needle into his left arm. What about his sleep? If you give him a higher dosage at night, he'll at least be able to sleep right through. As it is now, he wakes up. Mrs. Tempest. Lady Vane Tempest. Sarah was testy. Ma'am, you'll have to discuss this with Dr. Svartsky. I cannot increase your husband's dosage. She abruptly left the room. I hate nurses. Sarah closed the door, then sat next to him. Would you like me to read to you? He smiled at her. Thank you, but I can't seem to stay focused on anything. My mind wanders. I couldn't even answer Shaw's questions. He understands. She lowered her voice. Henry, it's just us. No repercussions. I understand that you don't want to make any accusations that you can't support. You're exceedingly fair that way. But between us, who would want to shoot you? Is there something that I don't know? He looked into his wife's imploring eyes. Sarah, the only person I can think of is Archie. Yes, of course. She put her hand on his. Lately, I'd have gladly shot him. He laughed, but it hurt so badly that he had to stop. She shook her head. He snapped, I suppose. The sheriff can't arrest him until they have more proof. How are you holding up, honey? You look done in. I'm tired. Sleep. You need lots of sleep. Yes, but it's so boring. He squeezed her hand and promptly fell asleep. Chapter 25. News of the bomber jacket appeared in the Daily Progress. A storm of speculation followed and a plethora of leads, all dead ends. This Saturday, Harry was determined to wax her Barbro coat. If she didn't do it now, she'd regret it in about 2 days, when more rain was predicted. She warmed her wax as she brushed the coat, inspected the seams, emptied the pockets, and an old movie ticket fell out. I can't even remember the last time I went to the movies. You need to go more often, Tucker advised. Mrs. Murphy, grooming her tail, listened to the blue jay squawking outside of the barn door. Birds excited her senses. Blue jays were saucy, fearless, and expert dive bombers. Shut up, Peter called out. Shut up yourself, fatso. I have half a mind to go out there and teach him a lesson, Peter grumbled. Murphy admired her tail. Having this appendage gave her better balance than Harry, but the maintenance could be tiresome. If she forgot to hoist it up, she picked up mud or dust. If she was caught in pouring rain, the tail looked like a very long rat tail, which offended her exalted vanity. If she brushed by a lily, she would smear her tail with sticky rust-colored pollen. In fall, she picked up hitchhikers. Biting them out of her tail was a time-consuming process. Still, she'd rather have a tail than not. She thought Harry would be much improved with a tail. Tucker could certainly use one. A flurry of squawks, screeches, and whistles drew her from her grooming. She dropped her tail, which she had picked up in her paw. That Jay family is pushing it too far. Peter shook herself and strolled to the barn door. Death to cats! The jay swooped down on Peter, flew through the barn, and zoomed out the other end. I will break your neck, the humiliated cat hollered, and I'll help you. Mrs. Murphy trotted over to Peter. Tucker joined with them too. Again, the jay swirled around the hayloft, then dove at a 45-degree angle. Murphy leapt straight up. The swish of tail feathers by her ear. She clapped both paws together, but missed. Ha! The jay called out. Let's lure him into the hayloft. We'll cut down his airspace, Peter sagely advised. Mrs. Murphy blinked. Forget him. I got an idea. Follow me. The two animals trailed after Murphy as she lopped across the field. Where are we going? Peter asked. To We are going to Tolly Urquhart's. Why? The day was pretty enough that Peter felt she could endure exercise. The blue jay made me think of it. Think of what? Tucker's soft brown eyes scanned the fields. I should have thought of this before. We need to work in circles around the barn. A human can't see the nose on his face. The animals arrived at the abandoned barn a half hour later. Since the weather was good, they had made excellent time. The sheriff has scored the barn and all the outbuildings. My plan is that we each work 50 yards apart in a circle. Pewter, take the closest circle. I'll take the second circle. Tucker, you take the farthest circle. If anyone finds something, yell. If we don't find anything, let's work 3 more circles. When you saw the 2 humans, where did they walk? Tucker lifted her head to the wind. Down the dirt road. If Tommy was killed out here, he could be buried anywhere, Pewter said. Yes, but the other human was little. He wouldn't be able to drag that heavy carcass that far. Okay, well, let's go to work. Tucker trotted 150 yards from the barn and shouted back. We'll use the road as our rendezvous point, but remember, I'm on the farthest circle, so it will take me longer to get back here. Okay, the 2 cats fanned out. Murphy worked quietly. She found old smoothed over bits of glass from long ago, bottles of poultices, worm remedies, even liquor. Here and there she turned up a rusted horseshoe or a rabbit's nest. She throttled her instincts to hunt. They worked in silence for about an hour. Murphy, on the second circle, came back about 10 minutes after Pewter. What'd you get? Pewter shrugged. Rat holes and high-top shoes. Come on. A piece of an upper, I think anyway. Humans sure put their bodies into some pinchy clothes and shoes. Wee-hoo! The sound to their right sent them scrambling. Tucker sat at the edge of an old dump. Pieces of tractor stuck out through the brambles, which seemed to grow overnight. What have you got there? Pewter thought of the graveyard of machines and thought of it eerie. Nothing, but wouldn't this be a great place to dump a body? Tucker said. Yes, but we would have smelled it when we led Harry to the barn. Mrs. Murphy marveled at how quickly brambles grow in the spring. They were already twirling around an old discarded hay elevator. Yeah, Tucker, disappointed, bowled through the thorns into the pile, her thick coat protecting her. I'll just nose around. No hunting, Tucker. We've resisted. Pewter, I wouldn't dream of it. The cats stuck around just in case. The strong, low-built dog pushed straight into the dump. She would nose through some of the debris, a delightful prospect. Being next to mountains, the area had shifted over the years with small tremors. A rusted truck, an ancient Chevy from the 1930s, had been turned on its side by quake tremors. Vines and rusting were slowly pulling it apart. A faint, tantalizing odor curled into Tucker's nostrils. She sniffed around the truck, then started digging underneath it. As she ripped into the soft earth, the corner of a sturdy, small suitcase appeared. It might have once sat on the seat of the truck, but had probably slid out once the glass broke. Over the decades, the truck had settled on top of it, and it was covered with fallen leaves and vines depositing layers of humus. Found an old suitcase. So what? Pewter Cat called. It's heavy leather, got steel corners. It has an alluring odor. Faded, very faded. What is she babbling about? Murphy grumbled. Let's go see. Tucker gave a hearty tug on the suitcase, then another. The latch gave just a bit. He tugged some more. Will you get back to work? Murphy circled around the worst of the brambles, crawling low to avoid the others. She walked over an old Massey Ferguson tractor, then dropped onto the side of the Chevy. I am not going in there, Pewter shouted. Who asked you? Then Tucker yelled again. Huh, golly! The cat stepped up as the dog sniffed the musty odor of old death. The 2 friends blinked. It's a tiny skeleton. A bit of lace still hung over the skull. A tiny human skeleton. Mrs. Murphy gasped. What will we do? Tucker's voice was almost a whisper. Will you come out of there? Pewter paced, irritated to the point of putting her up her tail. We found a skeleton, Murphy called out. You're just saying that to get me in there. No, we're not, they answered in unison. Pewter paced, sat, paced, cursed, then finally crawled in. You're lying. I know you're lying. Look, Mrs. Murphy leaned back. Liar. Nonetheless, Pewter did look. Oh no, she sat down. Nobody buries their baby in a suitcase. Tucker was indignant. You're exactly right. Murphy licked the dog's ear. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Pewter asked. Someone killed this little thing, Mrs. Murphy sighed. Tucker, do you think we can pull the suitcase out of this rubble? No. The rats will get at it, or raccoons. Pewter felt quite sad. Can you cover it again? Yes, it wasn't very deep. If you two help, it won't take long. Tucker pushed the suitcase back, then turned around, throwing dirt on their discovery with her hind legs. The cats threw dirt on it as well. Once it was covered, they took a breather, then crawled back out. Let's go home, a subdued Pewter requested. We won't find Tommy Van Allen. Chapter 26. At the eastern end of the Crozet, on Route 240, the large food plant, which had begun through successive corporate owners, dominated the skyline. On the south side of the white buildings ran the railroad tracks, a convenience should they need carloads of grain shutted off onto sidings. These days, huge trailers pulled in and out of the parking lot, a sea of macadam. Each time a driver shifted gears, a squelch of diesel smoke would shoot straight upward, a smoke signal from the internal combustion engine. The giant refrigerator trucks hauled frozen foods to refrigerated warehouses from whence the product made it directly to the freezer sections of supermarkets. Loading the behemoths into the docking area plunged men from cavernous freezers into the baking temperature outside, and then into the long, cold trailers. This was not the most desirable job in the United States, and many a Crozet High School graduate working on that platform rued the day he had decided not to try for college. While a lot of the town's residents worked in the food factory, just as many did not. It was odd, really, how little social impact the big corporation had on the town except for creating traffic in the morning and then again at quitting time. For a manager on the way up, the Crozet was a good stop. Most deplored the small town, calling it podunk or some other put down. For those who weren't Southern, the jolt of Virginia life came like unexpected turbulence at 20,000 feet. Charlottesville, offering some cultural delights, was disdained because it wasn't Chicago, a fact that Charlottesvillians were keen to perpetuate. Wilson C. McGoffrey, 32, ambitious, organized, and a student of time management schemes, daily outraged those people working in this unit. Bad enough that he mocked their speech, he called them slow and insignificant. Now he'd taken to putting up flowcharts for the workers' edification. Next to the flow chart and the weekly productivity quota, McGoffrey had his underlings dubbed the weenie list, workers who had excelled. Two were chosen each week. Next to that was the shit list, the names of those who did the poorest work. If your name made the shit list 3 times in 1 year, Wilson fired you. Simple as that. The huge refrigerated units were part of McCoffrey's responsibility. The freezers housed raw foods that would be processed into turkey dinners or roast beef or linguine. Occasionally, a bottle of Shine or store-bought alcohol would be secreted in a back corner far from Wilson's eyes. Dabney Shift, cousin to Market, didn't have a drinking problem as much as he had a specific thirst. A good worker, he nimbly sidestepped Wilson. Chewing fisherman friends' lozenges helped. Dabney slipped away from the loading dock, telling his buddy he was heading to the bathroom. Instead, he made straight for the meat locker in the back. He walked in and turned on the lights, revealing sides of beef hanging overhead. The back corner had a joist, slightly separated, providing the perfect place to wedge a slender flask of Shine. He needed only a nip to feel the wondrous warmth, a general flow of well-being. He hurried to the back, unscrewed the cap, and knocked back a healthy swallow. He opened his eyes mid-pull. His mouth fell open, grain alcohol spilling into his shirt. He dropped the flask, running back out the door. Oh my goodness, what's going on? Chapter 27. You won't mention the company? We aren't responsible. Wilson McGoffrey pressured Rick Shaw. Nobody could blame us. Facts are facts, Mr. McGoffrey. The body was found in Good Food's refrigerator. Wilson, revulsion turning to anger, wheeled on Dabney. Do you have something to do with this? It's bad enough you were drinking on company time. Rick interrupted, motioning for Dabney to follow him. If you don't mind, Mr. McGoffrey, I'd like to question Mr. Shiflett alone. Wilson did mind, but he held his tongue. Rick took Dabney away from the corner of the corpse, where the corpse of Tommy Van Allen hung, by handcuffs dangling from a meat hook. He'd been shot once in the temple, a neat job, very little mess. His Schaffenhausen watch remained on his wrist, his signet ring was on his finger, and his $523 cash was in his pants pocket along with his keys. His eyes glazed, were staring, his mouth hung open, but he was perfectly preserved, being frozen stiff. Now, Dabney, pay that Yankee son of a bitch no mind. He's gonna fire me. He can try. Man can't be fired for finding a corpse. At the mention of the word corpse, Dabney paled and began shaking. I feel bad, Sheriff. It's a terrible shock. I didn't kill him. Didn't think you did. He clapped Dabney on the back. How often is this meat locker checked? Daily. He lowered his voice. In theory. Maybe someone sticks their head in once a day, but you know, probably no one has walked all the way back here since Tommy's been missing. Unless they're in on it. Hadn't thought of that. Dabney was feeling better, as long as he didn't look at the body. Do you know anyone who might bear a grudge, who... No. He didn't have anything to do with the company, Sheriff, other than building the new office wing that was 11 years back. I know you came back for a swig, Dabney. Why hadn't you came back here before? Dabney looked far away from Rick. Used up the rest of my stash. This was the last bottle until I refilled the others and started all over again. He lifted his head, his smile weak. And nothing? And Wilson knew nothing? Dabney shook his head. No. How long ago did you put your flask back here? 3 weeks, I reckon. I don't know. Rick wrinkled his forehead. Go on, Dabney. I'm sorry you had to go through this. I might want to talk with you later. Wilson McGoffrey sidled up. You have influence with the press. McGoffrey, you haven't lived here long enough to feel anything for that slab of human beef hanging back there, but let me tell you, as men go, he was a good man. Not a perfect man, not always an even-tempered man, but a decent man. He stopped for breath. I can't keep this out of the news. If you obstruct justice in any way, I'll have your ass. Am I clear? Yes. You sounded like a New Yorker for a minute. Cynthia had been standing behind her boss. He turned around. Is that a compliment or an insult? Depends. Mr. McGoffrey, did you know the victim? Only in passing. He clipped his words. Did you like him? Rick felt his nose get colder by the minute. What little I knew of him, yes, he was a pleasant fellow. All right, you can go. Rick paused. One last thing. Don't fire Dabney Shiftert. Man's got a problem. Wilson was furious that the redneck had put one over on him. He performs his duties. Drinking during work hours is against company regulations. Then get the man into a program. Don't fire him. He has 3 months to feed. He has 3 mouths to feed, and he's a hard worker. I've known him all my life. If you want to get along in Crozet, work with people. Do you understand? Wilson understood that the sheriff was mad at him, but he didn't understand exactly what was being asked of him. Cynthia spoke up. The sheriff is saying that you will lower your productivity and maybe even harm your career if you don't learn that showing a little concern for your workers might boost morale. If Dabney was slacking off on the job, okay, then be a hard ass, but help him. You might need some help yourself someday. I'll take it under consideration. He walked off, nearly as stiff as Tommy Van Allen. Jesus, what a bonehead. And I'll bet he has his MBA, Shaw said. Boss, this was in Van Allen's trench coat pocket. Cynthia held a condom wrapper in her gloved hand. Any sign of the condom? No. Coop, how do you think he got into that meat hook? She shrugged. He could have been hoisted up the same way they hoist beef. Come on, I'll show you. They walked outside and Cynthia pointed out a squarish machine used to move pallets loaded with heavy cartons. Modified, the machine could also lift up sides of beef. Possible, he walked over. How much does one of these things cost? About $16,000 in retail. How do you know that? Asked Wilson. Ah, yes, he'd know. He'd heard the gurney rolling down the outside walkway. Coroner's good. Body's been frozen blue, but I bet he can establish some time of death. What he can't establish is was he killed here or brought here? And why here? Why not just dump him in the waste unit like dead meat? His voice rasped. I have never seen anything like this in my years of law enforcement. Me neither. He shot her a sharp glance. You're still wet behind the ears. I've seen enough murders to know most of them are committed in a white-hot rage. This was not. The bomber jacket in Herb's truck was a neat trick, too. A little flag to let us know that we aren't on top of this case. The gurney rolled over past them. Tommy tucked into 2 body bags since his arms were frozen straight up. Diana Robb, the paramedic, couldn't get him into one bag without breaking his arms, and that would compromise evidence. She stopped as her co-workers continued to push the body to the ambulance. Weighed a ton, like moving a boulder. Better than shaking off the maggots that crawl up your leg. Those suckers bite. Rick hated that stench. You've got a point there. Never would I have thought Tommy would end this way. I could have pictured a jealous husband shooting him maybe, but nothing like this. Nasty, isn't it? Coop said. Yep, Diana grimaced. She rejoined her crew. Rick half closed his eyes to hide his frustration. Chapter 28. Mrs. Murphy watched a bejeweled hand reach into the post office box. Playfully, she swatted. Big Mim withdrew her hand. Murphy, stop it. Harry, your cat is interfering with federal property again. Mim reached in once more. Murphy, behave. Harry walked over to the post boxes. She peered through the brass box as Mim peered in from the other side. Peekaboo. Back at you. Mim was in a good mood. Aunt Tally, however, was not. A 62-year-old woman acting like a silly schoolgirl. I am not 62. And I'm not 93, or is it 91? She sighed. I lied about my age for so many years, I can't remember how old I really am. But I remember exactly how old you are, Mimsy. A light hint of malice floated up through her voice. My sister said you kicked in the womb so hard you gave her a hernia. The turned-up collar of Mim's expensive English tailored shirt seemed to stiffen. Harry and Miranda aren't interested in that. Oh, yes, we are, came the chorus, the animals included. Tally leaned across the divider. Urquhart's conceive with no difficulty at all, of course. She called over her shoulder to Mim, sorting her mail. And little Mim gave you a couple of whacks. Mim ignored her, so she continued. I never had any children myself, but I've spent a lifetime observing them, from birth to death sometimes. I've outlived everyone except my imperious niece and her daughter. I'm not imperious, Aunt Tally. That honor belongs to you. Oh, la. Tally's eyebrows rose, as did her voice. Pewter, sound asleep on the table, was missing the exchange, but Murphy and Tucker drank in every word. I never knew your mother, Miranda Hagendauber told Tally, but everyone says that she was beautiful. She was. Jamie got her looks and I got Daddy's brains. We'd have all been better off if that genetic package had been reversed. Jamie Urquhart was Tally's deceased brother. Maybe not these days, but certainly in mine. You're fishing for compliments. Mim joined her at the wooden divider. You looked good then, and you look good now. Ha! Every plastic surgeon in America could work on me, and I'd still look 2 years older than God. Her bright eyes darted to Miranda. Sorry. That's quite all right. You're still a religious nut, I take it. Tally's smile was crooked and funny. Miranda opened her mouth, but nothing came out. This is getting good, Tucker giggled. I think we should wake up Pewter? No, let her suffer. We can tell her every syllable, and she'll scream that we made it up. Mrs. Murphy ducked her head and rubbed it under Tucker's ruff. The cat had jumped off the 8-inch wooden divider behind the mailboxes to sit with the dog. Tally, Mim admonished her. She is. She quotes the scriptures more often and more accurately than those jackleg TV preachers. Ought to get your own TV show, Miranda. Make a bloody fortune. She threw back her head and laughed. This moment of Jesus brought to you by General Motors. If the good Lord were with us today, he'd drive a Chevy. Trade in your sandals on a V8. All eyes fixed upon Tally, her red beret tilted up at a rakish angle. Her eyes were merry, her lipstick disappearing into the crevices above her still full lips. Think Mrs. H will pinch a hissy? Tucker took a step backwards. No, she'll chalk it up to advanced age, then go pray for her. Murphy leapt onto a counter, Mim's face in crimson though. Woo-wee. We'd better be going now. Mim put her hand under Tally's bony elbow. I'm not going anywhere until I hear what Miranda has to say. You were the cutest little girl in Crusette. Harry looked at Miranda with new eyes. It had never occurred to her that her friend might have once been cute, although she wasn't unattractive now, just plump. Miranda cleared her throat. I attend the Church of the Holy Light, from which I draw great comfort, Tally, but I don't think I'm a religious nut. You weren't like this while George lived. It's a substitute. Aunt Tally, that really is going too far. Mim stamped her Gucci-shod foot. I can say what I want when I want. That's the benefit of advanced age. Not that you'll listen. Like Sir H. Vane getting shot. If you ask me, it's a wonder nobody shot that war hog earlier. If this drivel about being knighted, all this drivel about being knighted, he hasn't done a damn thing. Probably making his money selling drugs to British rock stars. He was knighted. Susan and I got on the internet to do the library of the British Museum in London and search through peers of the realm. Then we went to London. He was knighted. Susan and I got on the internet to the library of the British Museum in London and searched through peers of the realm. Then we went to the London Times and pulled up a bio. You didn't tell me. Miranda more upset by this omission than Tally's assault. Slipped my mind. Anyways, we did it over lunch hour. Well, what'd you find out? Mim demanded. He built airports throughout Africa, in the countries formerly part of the British Commonwealth. He built other things too, but he made the millions building these airports. He is the genuine article. Oh hell, I liked believing he was a fake, Tally pouted. Susan screeched up in her Audi station wagon and hopped out, forgetting to close the door. She was in her spandex workout clothes. She threw open the door to her post office. They found Tommy Van Allen. Pewter, wake up! Murphy jumped on the table to pat Pewter's face. Grumbling, the fat kitty opened her eyes. Tucker hopped down, trying to get closer to the humans. Harry opened the divider door for her to go out front as Miranda walked out to Susan. He was hanging in the big freezer room at Good Foods. What? Why hasn't Rickshaw informed me? Mim believed herself to be the first citizen of Crusette. Her and her husband was the mayor to boot. Mim, even Jim doesn't know, Susan breathlessly said. Then how do you come by this unsettling knowledge? Tally asked. I dropped by Ned's office just as the phone rang. Dabney Shiflett was fired by his boss for drinking on the job. It was Dabney who found Tommy. He'd snuck into a meat locker for a quick nip and found Tommy Van Allen hanging from a meat hook by a pair of handcuffs. Frozen, just totally frozen. My God, Mim couldn't believe it. Did Dabney tell Neb how he was killed? Harry kept a cool head as always. Yes, shot straight through the temple, neat as a pin, Dabney said. Neat as a pin. Can you imagine? People have been shot around here since gunpowder. Before that, the Indians used bows and arrows, clubs and knives. Killing is one of our favorite pastimes. Tally flatly stared. She's got a point there. Pewter, riveted by the news, agreed with the old lady. Yeah, but this is... Tucker was interrupted by Susan continuing. The only good thing is, he wasn't pinned on the meat hook. At least he was hanging by handcuffs. It's the handcuffs that worry me. Murphy paced the counter. Why? Tucker's pink tongue contrasted with her white fangs. This was thought out. I wonder how long Tommy was alive wearing those handcuffs before he was killed. Peter flattened her ears, then swept forward again. Torture? Physical or psychological, or even sexual. Those handcuffs bother me. Chapter 29. The other news of the day, not quite as shocking as the discovery of Tommy Van Allen, concerned Archie Ingram. When Deputy Cooper met him at the county offices to question him further about the shooting at Oak Ridge, he asked her about the Van Allen murder. He said he had heard about it on his C-band radio. Cooper, suspicious as to how quickly information like that would get on to the C-band, drilled him on this. He lost his temper and slugged her. The county commissioner was sitting in the county jail for assaulting an officer. Bail wouldn't set until the next morning. Cynthia, glad to put Archie in his place, nonetheless called around to check Archie's story. Dabney Shiflett had put the news on the C-band along with a most unflattering portrait of the man who had just fired him. Since Wilson McGoffrey drove a car, not a truck, and had no two-way radio, Dabney rightly figured it would be days before McGoffrey learned what had been said about him. This small revenge gave Dabney some comfort. Chapter 30. Harry and Mrs. Hagendauber drove out to Tommy Van Allen's the evening of the body's discovery. His housekeeper, Helen Dodds, now in her late 50s, thanked them for their offer of help, but was afraid to make any decisions until Tommy's estranged wife, Jessica, showed up. She was due in from Aiken, South Carolina, in the morning. Eileen Ingram, Archie's wife, joined them in the living room. Mrs. Dodds said everyone had to come by to help. The Tuckers, Reverend Jones, Sarah Vane Tempest, Mim and Little Mim, just everyone, no matter what was happening in their lives. She was grateful, she went on, and was only sorry Tommy hadn't known he had so many friends. Then she burst into tears. Eileen, petite and curly-haired, put her arm around Helen's shoulders. There, Helen, I'm so sorry for all of this. She glanced up at Miranda. Helen feels this is her fault. Helen sobbed anew. I always tried to keep track of Tommy's schedule, but lately I've fallen behind and, she dropped her voice, he's been secretive. Helen had been a dear friend of Eileen's now deceased mother, and Eileen had remained close to the older woman. As soon as she heard the news of the body's discovery, she hurried to Helen's side. Helen, this is not your fault. It may not even be Tommy's fault. Terrible things just happen. Before Miranda could guide Helen towards heavenly support, Helen startled everyone by shouting, Well, I hope they get him. I hope whoever killed Tommy fries in the electric chair. Harry cut off any attempt by Miranda to describe the Lord's justice. Helen, I'm sure Sheriff Shaw will get to the bottom of this. We all need to keep our eyes and ears open. The smallest thing may have significance. Mrs. Murphy climbed out of the truck. Tucker was stuck in the cab, complaining bitterly. Peter had stayed back at Mark Shiflett's store to be picked up on the way home. Tommy's fiery red Porsche 911 Targa was parked in the garage. Tommy, Vane Tempest, and Blair Bainbridge had indulged in competitive consumption. Murphy sniffed the driver's side door. The tires, the front and back of the machine. Not that she expected to find anything, just a force of habit. On her hind paws, she stretched her full height to look into the driver's window. The keys were in the ignition. Mrs. Murphy, Harry called. The cat scampered back to the truck. Miranda was already on the passenger side, Tucker wedged between her and Harry. The cat soared into Harry's lap, then snuggled next to Tucker. Harry backed out, heading toward town. It was good of Eileen Ingram to come by, considering her troubles. Archie needs to turn to the Lord. How much plainer must his message be? Miranda, these days when people are in trouble, they think of turning to a therapist if they think of anything at all. Won't work. I wouldn't know. They passed Boom Boom and waved. My point proven. Miranda let pass the opportunity to reprimand Harry for her snideness toward Boom Boom. I suppose Eileen was on her way to bail out Archie. If she had any sense, she'd leave him in there. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Mrs. Hagendauber quoted Matthew 23, verse 12. Did that just pop into your head, or is there a point to it? Harry, don't be ugly. I'm sorry, you're right. She sighed heavily. I'm upset. Seeing poor Mrs. Dobbs break down like that, and what's going to happen to her? You know what's in Tommy's will? Who knows what's in Tommy's will, or if he even had one? He had one. You don't run a big construction company without something like that. Probably had a fat insurance policy too. I suppose Jessica will get all of it, even if they have separated. He could have changed his will. Yes, but they aren't legally divorced yet. What made you think of the Bible verse about pride? Oh, Mrs. Hagendauber had forgotten to answer Harry's query. Tommy, H. Vane, Blair, and even Archie. Ridley was part of it too for a little while. It's a rich boys club, expensive sports cars, airplanes. Archie doesn't even have that much money, Harry interrupted. Enough for a land, whatever you call it. Land Rover, Harry paused. I never thought about that. I mean, it seemed discreet enough. White. Cynthia Cooper's squad car was parked in front of the bank, although it was after banking hours. Harry turned into the parking lot, pulling in front of the old brick freestanding bank building. Hey there. Cooper rolled down her window. We just came from Tommy Van Allen's. Poor Mrs. Dobbs. And Eileen Ingram was there to help out. Miranda spoke over the animals' heads. She can't spring Archie until tomorrow. What? Both women said. The judge won't set bail until then. He can't do what? Harry wondered. He can do whatever he wants. He's the judge, Coop smiled. You've had a hard day, Miranda said sympathetically. I've had better ones, Cooper smiled weakly. All heads turned as Sarah Vane Tempest drove by with H. Vane Tempest in the passenger seat. He's made a remarkable recovery, Miranda noted. For how long? Mrs. Murphy cryptically said. All right, so we are ending on chapter 30, lots of excitement, and we will pick up on chapter 31 of Rita Mae and Sneaky Pie Brown's Cat on the Scent.